To answer your question, thriving at senior levels can be incredibly demanding. Leadership is performance and it's performance, all the time. And I think one thing I specifically learned over the last couple of years is like how this thriving takes just an intense amount of intentionality, like with every 5 minutes. Like sometimes people are surprised where, I'm very intentional about my life in 5 minute blocks.
Mhm.
And so it doesn't just happen, it has to take a certain level of intentionality to do that.
All right. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Habitual Growth Podcast. With me today is another special guest. This is Sharon Martin. She's currently the SVP of the Worldwide Solutions Engineering at Alteryx, and she brings 25 plus years of experience, leadership, engineering expertise, and a proven track record of driving business transformation through innovative strategies and high performing teams. But I think more importantly, Sharon, where you really have an impact is just how much of an advocate you are for STEM initiatives and being an active leader in the community, supporting youth, health, and educational programs nationwide. So I know that's a nice little blurb of your bio, and that's the fun stuff that we can read. But Sharon, who are you? Tell us a little bit more about you that we can't read necessarily on your bios.
Thanks, Nathan. Well, I'm certainly glad to be here, and thanks for taking the time with me. I've come to know you and Habitual Growth brand over the last few years, and it's been a meaningful part of my life and even a meaningful part of who I am today. So I run the global solutions engineering team at Alteryx. I've been a technologist and a leader for most of my career. I'm based here in Silicon Valley. I live in San Francisco with my husband. We're coming up on our 10-year anniversary, actually, in just a couple days. And then our daughter that's actually in first grade. We love it here. We love the art and culture and diversity and innovation that comes out of the Silicon Valley. We try to spend a lot of our time also, giving back. Education is a value that's, really important to my husband and I. So we spend a lot of time up there as well. But yeah, it's been a wonderful journey so far and a long career full of technology and, kind of building my own personal growth and my family along the way.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you for that intro. And this is an exciting conversation for a number of reasons. So one, you are a part of the Habitual Growth family. You do sit on our board in full disclosure for everybody, but also you are an active Habitual Growth user, which I think is really cool. Half of our audience are, small business owners, entrepreneurs, those really getting started, those interested in personal growth. And then we have the other half, which are people that essentially like yourself, work in larger organizations. They're either leaders or managers themselves, or they're working for somebody else aspiring to be those leaders and managers one day. And I think it's a really cool juxtaposition to really bring this together and see some of the value. So I'm excited to talk about this today because you are a person who thrives in these big corporate structures. And I know for some people that really works, for other people that doesn't. But today we really wanted to highlight around how people can grow and thrive in these organizations because it's not always as apparent as you oftentimes think it is. So with that, let's just dive right in. One of the first questions I always have is just maybe can you share a time of where you've had to make a difficult decision that tested your values and personal identity within being a leader in a corporate environment? Because oftentimes it's the pressure of us thinking we can't do certain things, thinking we can't be authentic. But can you share a little bit more about your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. I mean, as you get higher and higher in, leadership roles, there's kind of always this tension or, kind of balance between kind of fiduciary responsibility to the corporate environment around, productivity and efficiency and all those types of metrics. But also as you move into senior leader roles, the importance and compassion and empathy towards people also gets very big. So you sort of have these two big elements that you're always having to balance and find the tension between those elements as a leader. I think there's probably two that stand out. One is a time where, as a senior leader, two, you want to be champion high performers or, potentially future leaders in your industry. And there's been times where, I've been challenged by wanting to champion someone that I saw a lot of potential in that other senior leaders at my company didn't. So, really had to champion this person, champion the skills that I saw in them, help pave the path and influence some other, kind of stakeholders along the way.
Hmm.
So this person was sort of like a non-obvious choice, but getting my peer group and stakeholders on that they, would be an elemental add to the organization and, would be able to perform, and taking this risk is, something that I've had to do before. One particular example comes to mind. And then the second, in the business world is always moving and transforming. If you have an organization that's not always morphing, you're probably not running a really healthy business. Restructuring, reorganizations, sometimes that might even include potentially role eliminations, is just a normal part of day to day
Mhm.
business and running a healthy business. So always with making reorg decisions or realignment decisions, that's really really fuels that tension between, the people piece and the fiduciary responsibility piece. And trying to make great business decisions while keeping in mind kind of the compassion and empathy towards the people that either might be, found without a home in the current organization, or maybe even found without a home in the company. And those are some of the toughest calls to make that kind of, exist in that tension.
Yeah. I love that. Those are perfect examples of my experience there in the corporate world as well. I want to pull on the thread real quick of, championing somebody who might not be that obvious choice. Like how did you deal with that tension, because sometimes that can be a really conflicting conversation. They're not always easy conversations. Obviously, you're stepping up to the plate, but how are you preparing? How are you constructing those conversations?
I think part of it was, well, first kind of coaching and guiding the person on how to show up, coaching their vocabulary, coaching their communication style, coaching their brand, and how to develop, evolve, and kind of cement their brand in the organization as someone to take a risk on. So that was sort of how I was working with the, particular person on maybe how to show up with some of these other people that I was trying to influence to bring into the org. I think another part of it was, me, I had earned a seat at the table where I was able to take a risk. And so, the C-suite above me in my peer group in the SVP rank, because I had, sort of taken the steps to be proven and have my own strong brand, and, habitual growth was actually a part of that. I had carved the space to, sort of be listened to, and carved the space where I had earned the right to influence and take a risk. And so that was part of my own sort of like personal and professional development conversations and work that I was doing with HG. And then I think, with the stakeholders and the people above me, they, I earned a trust where I could make the decision and was just kind of able to, communicate the possibility, communicate the plan, the metrics of success, and then, if it didn't work, what might be the plan B. So kind of like three different kind of strategies there that all played together.
That's awesome. And we're gonna pull back on your HD work as well here in a little bit because I know and you've been a very strong advocate of that, which I absolutely love. But you said something interesting in your second point earlier about an organization always moving and stressing and changing, right? And that becomes a part of it. But I recall, at least for a lot of my colleagues at the time when I was working for some bigger organizations, that wasn't always the mentality. It kind of felt at certain levels, the organization is just moving. You just get assigned tasks, you go through the work, you just do that. Did that change? Did you have that mentality up until a certain point and you realized, hey, this is almost an inflection point of how I need to perceive not only my own personal growth, but the growth of the organization?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I think part of it was, the last career decision I made was moving to a company at a very different stage of growth. So I think as a leader, you always have to evaluate what stage of growth is the company in at that time, and then kind of deploy the organizational philosophies or organizational best practices that align with where that company is in that certain stage of growth. Kind of in that 1 to 2 billion range, you found $1 billion worth of happy, healthy customers that are doing business with your brand, and you're trying to get to that 2 billion.
Mhm.
There's a kind of very different kind of malleability in the organization to be able to get from 0 to 1 billion, from 1 to 2. So you kind of always need to be evaluating where the company's at, where your customers are at, and then designing an organization around that to grow the business as well as maintain the business.
And is that, at your level, making some of those decisions, is that a level where you are purposely putting some of these stretch goals in front of your team, saying, hey, our job is to grow the business. Obviously, you don't want everything to be chaotic all the time, right? But I think about personal growth, personal development. And if you're not challenging yourself, you're just kind of checking boxes and being stagnant and you're not really growing a whole lot. And it sounds like the same thing when you're setting goals for an organization kind of delivers that same impact. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, you always want sort of like some key anchor priorities or vision that you're, sort of always coming back to. You need to be able to, communicate the organization of the why all the time, even if you're operating in a lot of chaos and speed. Like, cutting through, staying really aligned to the anchors of the vision, and always communicating, the why we're doing this, why it's important is always like a great thing to do. And there's obviously like a lot of growth in there because whenever there's speed of business or change in business, there always has to be growth and, challenging existing ways of doing things, intellectual curiosity, a lot of resilience and perseverance. That always comes with chaos and speed in business. So that's usually what I try to hire for too. But with those qualities, usually um, you need kind of the systems in place where you're always thinking about kind of personal growth and professional growth to, operate in a climate that's usually moving very fast and can somewhat feel chaotic. You really kind of need to anchor back to your own, kind of system of personal and professional growth to stay ahead, to stay happy, to enjoy your work and to be inspired by your work. So you don't just, get caught in the chaos. You're existing in the chaos and it actually feels fun
Yeah.
and you're doing
Yeah.
great work.
That makes a lot of sense, and I'm thinking about, how you mentioned, I'm advocating for this individual that may or may not have been a good fit for the company. Obviously, you think they are, you're bringing them in. You do a lot of coaching at your level as well, and I think that's just naturally as a leader, you pour a lot into your team, right? You set ambitious goals, BHAGs, whatever they are, and you work towards those. When you're dealing with personal growth, right? Because a lot of this, like you said, you might be coaching people how to show up to a meeting, what words to use or how to phrase things? How do you be a little bit more professional? How much of your time do you typically spend on your team doing those things? And how do you really break through the tension of saying, that's an impossible goal, like we're never going to be able to hit that, and instead turning that around and saying, hey, here's how you stay challenged and motivated and using the journey as part of that growth tool?
It's a great question. I think coaching and development is the number one most important thing in business. I think if you want to get to, business results and business impact, you need to, constantly be thriving in a culture of development, coaching, guidance, always on feedback. And then the work gets done because through that, then you're, generally have more inspired and motivated employees where you're connecting to, their center of strength of what their strengths are and what they're inspired by. And then if you're sort of able to, find those centers through coaching and guidance, all you have to really do is simply align the work. And then more often than not, expectations are greatly exceeded, kind of if you're able to connect, person's personal strengths or personal joys of what they love doing with what they're naturally inspired by. That's kind of the hard work of like coaching and leadership. And then you just give them a metric to go do. And generally they just kind of, blow through it. So
Hmm.
that's why I kind of like really generally anchor on a culture of, I'd say, personal development and professional development first. And that
Hmm.
generally drives a culture of performance and business results.
Hmm. I love that you use the word culture, and it as you were speaking, kind of the way that you phrased that response got me thinking about some of my own experiences. I'm curious how you personally lead your teams. Do you create almost a culture for your team inside the greater culture of the organization, and is that something that you strive to do, or happens just organically under your leadership and the team members you bring in there?
I think culture is an interesting thing. It's sort of, I don't think it's really set by one person. It's not set by me. It's set by, sort of everybody in the organization. It's sort of its own sort of living, breathing being thing, right? That exists. And there's a lot of humans that then exist in these sort of like unwritten rules that is the culture. I certainly play like a really big role and my frontline leaders play a really big role, but the employees on the front line, they play as big as a role as I do in the culture. I think culture is actually not like one big thing that you can say this is what it is and then you set it and it happens. I think culture happens through the millions and billions of tiny interactions every single day with me, with my leadership team, and with each other. And then it sort of becomes, sort of this flywheel that then becomes kind of the unwritten rules of the organization with, how we act together, how we respect one another, what we agree that great looks like.
Hmm.
And that can just be through, every single one-on-one conversation with me, every Teams message, every Slack message, the way that we recognize each other, just really kind of like living that in every single second and minute I found, sort of creates the culture. And culture takes time. Like I think some people think that, or some leaders think they can come in like with a vision statement and then put five values on and then everybody's aligned.
Changes.
Can take time. Like, just as we were talking about the malleability of an organization, like culture is always something you have to work at because the organization is going to change. The business climate is always going to change. So your culture is always going to morph. So one thing I always tell my leadership team is like, never show up to a one-on-one with one of your employees if you're not going to be your best self. Like you
Mm,
have to, in every single conversation with an employee, you have to be your best self. You have to be engaged on coaching mode, video on, listening. And if you can't be that person, don't show up to the employee. So like I think things like that are really, really important. Just like a lot of those unspoken interactions, the way that humans work with each other. And I hold a really high standard there.
I love that. You touched on so many good things, and I love that because I've never actually heard somebody articulate that out loud. It reminds me of a couple of different things, but I'm curious because I think it's really easy for people to focus on, let's say, A players and B players, right? Developing culture, you're right. It's a bunch of interactions over time constructed by everybody, and we always try to be our best selves. Sometimes I feel like we all know what to do. We think we should say something. We know how to show up. Turn your video camera on. Be, happy or frame things in specific ways. But when you reiterate those small little messages of like, hey, if you're not your best self, don't show up, right? Like empower the other people to make that choice for themselves. You still have responsibilities, you still have expectations, but the standard is here, right? If you can't be here, don't be showing up. We're going to have to redo this a different day. I'm curious how you handle, though, instead of the A players and the B players, where it might be a little bit easier to coach them because they're open and willing and things like that. How do you deal with maybe C or D players to really buy into that culture? Do you treat them any differently? Do you put more effort and resources and things like that in front of them?
It's a good question. I think the first thing I'll acknowledge is that like it's okay to have a team made up of all different players. I think that like, A plus players, A players, B players, are all really, really important. Even C players are important, if you're, coaching them up and they're bringing a different elements to the team. So I'll start with that. I don't think like it even exists to always have a team of A plus players. You play with the players you have on the field and you just keep coaching up. Right. So, I actually had a really interesting experience in a previous life where I had a second line leader that was reporting to me that was sort of in this category that you're talking about. And I had this really eye opening moment when I realized that this person had plateaued in their leadership development. And what's even worse is they didn't want to get better.
Hmm.
So I think like when you hit that moment is when sort of conversations need to change. Like if people are, if they're growing, if they're open, if they are, making progress, that's good. And I mean, it has to be at a rate that keeps up with the business.
Hmm.
But once I, sort of worked with this person enough to realize that like they had a fixed mindset and this person actually didn't want to grow anymore, I think that's when the conversation changes and it becomes less of coach up and maybe coach out to do something different that you want to do because you're not showing up as your best self to the team anymore if you're not raising your own bar and if your previous growth mindset now turned into a fixed mindset. So, and then to your second part of your question, it's usually best to give your A players most of your time, energy, all those things. I mean, your highest performers deserve the best of you. It doesn't mean that you're not paying attention to the other people, but you really want to like keep investing in and amplifying the strength of your highest performers, which are generally your highest culture performers, so your culture
Hmm.
leaders and your business performers as well. So I found that that is best. And then get to the point with your C or D players where, you're trying to coach up, coach up, coach up as much as possible. And then if the coaching up stops for whatever reason, like this other person that hit the plateau,
Hmm.
that's when, you need a different player on your team that's growing. There's an exercise that I do with my team leaders where I have them plot their team members on a performance culture quadrant. So I put culture on the y-axis and, business performance on the x-axis. And your A players are up here. They're the ones with the highest business results and the highest culture, right? They're the ones that are patting people on the back. They're the ones that are, pioneering culture, championing culture, doing great things for the company internally and externally. And then you've got your people that are, lower business performers, but high culture. That can still be okay, right? Because there's still a value add to the team, but you just need to coach them on business. But then your biggest problem is usually if you have high business performers with low culture. And that's kind of then starts to get into the gray area of like, okay, this guy or gal is delivering the best business results, but no one likes to work with them and they're taking back from the experience of what it's like to be on a team. So I kind of like to think of not in the sense of like plotting people somewhere, but think of them in a quadrant, like, put them into a space where, they you understand where their framing is so that you can approach them in a different way. So your quadrant A people, you approach in this way, your quadrant B people, you approach in this way.
Mm,
I think it's just helpful to kind of like frame a discussion, not in the sense to put people on a plot, but just to
right.
frame with a discussion on where they are with performance and cultural results.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I love the visual representation. It sounds weird to do, but as you were describing it, I can totally picture how that would be relevant.
Framing.
Yeah. Plus, I think it helps pull you out of your own thoughts and opinions, right? Maybe it's an anonymous survey. I don't know how you do this, but like if it is or it isn't, right? You can combine that and you can see, hey, this person is thought of really highly in the organization, even though I don't know if they're doing the best work as their leader, or vice versa, something like that. I'm curious, and then I want to pivot more over to your transformation, Sharon, but just kind of pulling at that thread around the people that have stopped growing. I think sometimes that's a really difficult assessment or call to make. And I'm curious how you've been able to do that in your own career with your team members. I think it's always easiest when people are just like, I don't really care. This is me. This is just how I'm showing up. And it's always a difficult situation when people are just doing the work because the response is, well, I did the work. I did what you asked me. And that doesn't mean you're a great employee. It doesn't even mean you do the work well. It just means I have to be told what to do every single time. But how do you identify when somebody has kind of hit the plateau of their growth and really is selectively choosing not to grow anymore?
I think time is a very important variable. So let's take this, person who was a second line leader. Um, and I think it's important to look at the time that someone's been in role. Like someone's growth should be keeping up with the time that they're in role. So this person, for example, was performing at the same level after 6 years that someone was after 1 year. So that can kind of help frame the discussion. The expectation isn't to get into a role and stay there when you earn that role. The expectation is the longer you're in the role, the better you should be getting at the role and the bigger impact you should be having. So that sort of helped frame the discussion as well, is like in terms of the amount of time you've been in this role, you're actually falling behind a little bit because your cultural and your business output should actually be growing at the same rate or sometimes faster than your actual time and role. So sometimes that can sort of help frame up the discussion. And then I've just asked before, like, do you love what you're doing or not? Because if you don't love what you're doing, this isn't the best thing for you or the company right now. And it's important to always be on the employee's side. Like, there's a reason they stopped or there's a reason they plateaued. And it usually means they've fallen out of love or joy with the work. And like, that's not good for the company or the employee or for me as the leader. So, sometimes you just kind of enter into that discussion of just like, is this it all comes back to, like, love and joy in your work. Like, if this work isn't bringing you love and joy anymore, then we have to talk about something different. And so sometimes you just, once you realize that maybe the professional growth is not keeping up with the time and role, having that conversation and always giving, like, really, really specific examples and framing it in you should be growing with your time and role. You being here 5 years, performing at the same level as someone who's 1 year isn't acceptable. That actually means you're falling behind.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really good. And I'm reflecting on some of the recent conversations I've had, over the past couple of weeks actually. There's so many people who have left jobs or feel like they've been pushed out because my manager's terrible or my leader, isn't inspiring to me or whatever it is. It goes back to the fact that this is a two-way street, right? Maybe you're just a D player and you need to take some accountability and push yourself. Maybe have different conversations. Approach your boss and just simply say, hey, I wish this really isn't working for me. I would like to be, somewhere else that is using these types of skill sets. Or, hey, can I work with you to exit the team, but go where else in the organization? I think there's a lot of those conversations missing. But that kind of brings me back to where you're at. And I want to focus on you for a second because I've had the pleasure of getting to know you over the last couple of years. What types of skill sets, mindsets, behaviors have you recognized that you've had to adopt or learn to challenge yourself to grow to be able to get into some more of these senior levels of an organization?
I think I mentioned before, I've been using or familiar with the habitual growth brand and app for I think probably just over a year or two now. And it's interesting as well. I also feel like I've realized my most personal and professional growth along that time as well. I mean, there's just been so much that's opened up for me personally in terms of like joy in my personal life as well as like professionally
I love it.
advancing and like having the seat at the table in like really incredible C-level meetings, which I never had before. So it's just kind of an interesting parallel to make. To answer your question, thriving at senior levels can be incredibly demanding. Leadership is performance, and it's performance, all the time. I think one thing I specifically learned over the last couple of years is like how this thriving takes just an intense amount of intentionality, like with every 5 minutes. Like sometimes people are surprised where, I'm very intentional about my life in 5 minute blocks.
Hmm.
And so it doesn't just happen, it has to take a certain level of intentionality to do that. Some other kind of, systems and philosophies I come back to is I think it's really important, especially in a senior role in a corporate environment, to get really clear on your why as a human and come up with, kind of your personal value statement, like what drives you as a human, what is important to you. And so my value statement is that I am here on this earth to leave humankind in a better place than I found it, through technology, because I love technology, through my natural God given strengths or gifts of who I am as a person, and through my family. And so I come back to that statement a lot when
Hmm.
making decisions on if I'm going to go on this business trip or if I'm going to say yes or no to this commitment. That is front and center for me in my life in terms of thriving as a corporate executive. So that's kind of like philosophy number one, is get really clear on that. And it should be your anchor and what you get up and think about. And, the last thing you think about when you go to bed, and it should help guide every decision that you make about, your time or your life or relationships. The second thing is I think heart, mind, and body, like physical body care, are really important. And it's important as a senior leader to, take care of all those three things: your heart, your mind, and your body. Because if you can't perform all the time as a leader, if you're depleted, your performance is going to start to suffer, not just as a leader, but kind of, who you are personally.
Hmm.
I think for me, I'll share maybe like two or three more, and then let me know where you might want to pull some threads. I think I am still a recovering perfectionist. I think perfection is one of the greatest evils as I understand it now, but I spent, most of my childhood, high schoolhood, and university trying to be a perfectionist. Then I've spent most of the last 20 years trying to unravel being a perfectionist, because I found that what actually really matters is progress over perfection. And it kind of comes down to like what's essential, what's good enough, and where can I let go. And those small things are actually like what can really propel you to personal and professional growth, is sort of understanding the nuances behind what's essential and what's not. I love some of the
Hmm.
work Greg McEwen has done around essentialism.
Yeah.
And that's helped me unwire my unfortunate addiction to perfectionism. There's also one philosophy that I've stayed with for a long time. It's called The Four Agreements. It was a book. We can link to it in the show notes.
Hmm.
But there's four major philosophies that I come back to time and time again, especially if I feel myself kind of getting off that North Star, or, emotional about something that happened at work, or, angry about something that happened. I come back to these a lot. The first one is, be impeccable with your word. The second is don't make assumptions. The third is don't take things personally. And the fourth is always do your best. And so I think if you live like that, you're going to be a very happy professional and a really happy, parent or spouse. I'll share one more quick story and then we can dive into some stuff. Yesterday, my daughter's 7. She had a really, really, really long day at school, and we're trying to learn piano together. So we're taking lessons, and it can be hard and frustrating to learn how to read music and play the keys. And
Hmm.
especially for a 7-year-old that starts her day early, um, she happened to have an extra long day at school for a variety of activities. She really didn't want to do this. So I said to her, all you need to do is do your best. Like, I'm not looking for the perfect song. Why don't we just both sit down and do our best, and then we'll be done? And like, it just changed the whole thing to just say, you know what? I do have my best in me right now. And maybe my best in me at 7 p.m. after a long day is different than the best in me that I had at 8 a.m. this morning. But she
Yeah.
found her best that she had in that moment, and I found mine. And like, that was great. We were able to kind of like high five because we gave something our best of what we had at the time. And so
Mm.
I think it, kind of just framed something differently than like, it didn't turn into this tension and fight of I don't want to do this. It turned more into let's give something all we've got together.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful.
The situation be nice and enjoyable.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that story, and anybody who's listened to the show for a while knows I say this all the time. But there's a line, and I may have said this to you in one of our previous conversations, but there's a line by Ed Milet, and he says most pressure is self inflicted, and I love that because Like you just said, when you just sit down and you give it your best, it doesn't mean it's going to be perfect. It means you're showing up. It means you're trying, you're putting in effort. But if that's what you get and you do your best, the rest of the pressure is off of you, right? You can't help how other people are going to think, how they're going to act, how they're going to say. And most of the time, what we think is going to happen doesn't actually happen. It's just in our own mind. So I love that you share that because I think that's so good. And it's so relevant for business environments too, in projects or sharing your opinion, in a work meeting, right? Trying to discuss different types of ideas. I don't want to be embarrassed, so I'm not going to share that versus, hey, this is my opinions. This is what I think. If you have a good leader at the table, right, they're going to welcome that. They want you to be empowered to be able to share and give and show up in the right ways.
And that's being impeccable with your word, right? Like, you can really kind of simply come back to that. Like, I believe in my word. I'm going to be impeccable with my word. And it's also my best. I'm just going to put it out there.
One of the things that you talked about in the beginning of this conversation is you said, you tell my frontline leaders don't show up unless you're at your best. And it was really interesting to hear how you espouse those same values for yourself. And hear this time and time again where, do as I say, not as I do type thing, specifically in the work environment. But I love that you're saying these are the important things for me. I'm going to operate exactly by those. I'm going to protect my sleep, my health, my time, whatever it is. I expect you to do the same. And that has so much more of an impact on your direct team members, the influence that you have. Yes, it's about words. Yes, it's about behaviors, but it's more about, is Sharon actually doing what she's telling us she's doing? Because if she is, she's very serious about it. She understands like why this actually works because she has lived through it to get to the places that she has in her career.
Yeah. I think like part of this too is, as a senior leader and then someone that wants to be a great spouse and a great parent and then show up well in their community, you kind of have to protect your energy like a resource and sort of put these rules and values, around that to protect your energy. And it looks like things like, holding boundaries and checking in with yourself often, being honest with yourself when you need to step back and kind of say no to the things that pull you off your center or pull you away from, your own personal North Star and then saying yes to things that like fulfill you in that moment. That's actually been a hard journey for me because if I felt like I needed a break during the workday or just wanted to take a walk or even like a quick meditation, like I
Mhm.
feel guilty. Like I've grown through that now where I realize if I'm getting those signals from myself, I'm not doing my best work and, kind of coming back to myself and listening to myself and what's important and holding boundaries. At that moment, I need to put a boundary up because my energy resource is either drained or being abused in some way. I just need to refill it so I can be
Mhm.
the greatest SGP mom, community member, and spouse possible. So, like, understanding what's happening and when and how and where to put up boundaries, I think is really important.
Absolutely. And I want to take that and I want to bring it back 1 second and we're going to marry them together here with this question because I think it's going to end up in the same place. But you said something very specific when you talked about leadership roles. You said leadership is demanding. You didn't say I'm always busy, but you said it's demanding. And I want to distinguish the difference between that. And I'd love to hear your thoughts because I have a very apparent example which I can share or we can take it down the road, but where that became very clear to me about how people operate at certain levels and the ones that are successful, the ones that really move up, protect their time like nobody's business. And it is because they are so intentional. They're busy, of course, but oftentimes it's not even that. It is because I have set very specific boundaries that I hold myself to. I have integrity. I know how to have the communication. I know what's important to me. I know what's my North Star, all those good things. And when you said I do this in 5 minute increments, it's not because Sharon is running all over the place and it's just so chaotic. It is because you have put purpose behind each of those minutes and you are defending that to show up for your best self.
Yes.
Was that something that you learned, or was there a moment where you were like, oh, now I totally get why people do this?
I think I learned it over time, just kind of through reading a lot of books around productivity is probably how it started, just doing research on the subject in general. And I think like over the last 2 years, just really refining it. Like the refinements over the last 2 years, I think, where I really got to, this kind of place of protecting energy and boundaries. And I think like overall, I'm just a lot happier and there's a lot more joy in my life too. Like once you get there. And I think that was kind of like the real breakthrough for me is like being able to manage demands and be like really happy and joyful while doing it with like a personal life that's full of love. Like that's kind of the holy grail thing that, kind of putting these systems and intentionality and in place, which is progress, not perfection. Like sometimes I work out 5 minutes a day, but you know what my HG um, app says, when I set my habits,
Hmm.
it says that's all I have to do. And sometimes I do 60 and sometimes I do 5. But just writing it down, and 5 to me is as good as 60. And if I did that day, like, I feel great. I'm like, "I moved my body today."
Yeah.
5-minute workout, and that's great because it's about consistency. It's about, like, small things over time that kind of compound to make big, big results, like just happiness and joy and, loving your life. So I think like finding, and that maybe ties back to a little bit of like the progress, not perfection too, right? Like if I didn't get 60, I'm not beating myself up. And like, I'm like, you know what? I said between 5 and 60 was good every day. And I did that today and I feel great about it.
I love that. I literally did a LinkedIn short video on this yesterday. I shot it yesterday and it was all about these these mini habits. It's about showing up. It's about keeping the momentum going. Some days you can do 5 minutes, some days you can do 20, 30, or 60, right? Did you prioritize it? Do you understand what you are doing is important to you for a very specific reason? Or are you just saying, I need to do this because you're checking a box?
Right.
And it really hit me in a way. I've been having a lot of these conversations lately, and one of those is I have he's actually a family member of mine. He's very protective of his time, but he is very intentional of what his North Star is. And when I first started interacting with him, it was always, and I've told him this, like it was always like I was always taken aback. I'm like, but I'm family. And he's like, okay, well, this is my time. I can choose to spend it with you or not. And I think sometimes it's like, well, I have this relationship, so I'm just gonna show up and we're gonna, maybe lack of a better term, shoot the shit for a little bit before we go into it. And at some point, you have to realize not everybody can operate in that way. It's, hey, I want to spend the time with you. I want to give back to you. Okay. But in order for me, let's say you're on this, for Sharon to show up and give her her best so I can create the most amount of value for Nathan, I need this from you. Right. And it's very much a dynamic and two-way street of what can I do, Nathan, to prepare Sharon to show up to give her best because I know she wants to do that. And it's an interesting dynamic that I think isn't really highlighted that much, specifically in corporate culture sometimes.
Yeah, that's really important distinction actually. And it can be hard sometimes. I mean, if you're very intentional about boundaries, sometimes it can come off like that to people. It does with me too. But I think like talking about it and communicating about like, why you're that way. It comes up from time to time, with my daughter's school and being asked to volunteer for a lot of things. And there's one thing I do for them, and I do it really well, and it's garden day. And I will show up every day and bring donuts with my daughter, and I will be there at garden day, but I don't do anything else. But they can count on me for that because I'm impeccable with my word and, comes back to those other things. And I'm really clear that, like, look, I will be fully there. I will be your garden gal. And
Hmm.
they know they can count on me for that, and it's like, she's not gonna do anything else, but you know what? She is there every day early with donuts on garden day with her daughter, dressed and ready to go, playing full out there. So,
Love that.
you just sort of need to, like, talk about that and why you are that way, and, like, that piece of life is important to me. I just don't have I'm giving the best of what I have to that compartment of my life, so everything else that's demanding can stay balanced.
Yeah. And that's so good. And I kind of want to now I want to parlay this into the next topic, which is what you're doing. Impeccable with your word is great, but you're also giving back, right? You're spending time with your daughter. That's really important. You also do this with other people though. And almost every successful leader that I've spoken to has the same kind of common thread. And that is there is servanthood here, right? We're here to help bring others up with us. We lift as we climb. Is that developed over time? Is that something that's just innate and ingrained into leadership on the way up? Or where does that really come from? I'm curious.
I think it's a good observation, actually. I've seen that too in my career. Like, usually, some of the leaders that I've watched the most that I most like to emulate have that thread. I think what happens, and this is what happened for me, is as you start developing as a leader, perspective becomes really important. And not just perspective in your life or your school community or, how you live your life. Global perspective becomes really, really important. And like, global economics, global learning, how everyone in the world is experiencing the world. Like, perspective becomes a really, really powerful leadership tool. And the way you gain perspective is by being involved in organizations that are different than you and serve people different than you. So I think that's where it keeps you very grounded. It keeps you, understanding what's important in life and what's not, so that, when you are exposed to leadership demands in the, corporate world, you're bringing a really grounded human perspective to things. And I think that's what it gives you, not because, that's why you want to give back is so you're a better leader. That's not what I'm trying to say. But I think that perspective becomes increasingly important the higher you get. And a human and global perspective is incredibly, incredibly important and probably why most senior leaders do it. And it's really fulfilling
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
able to, like, be involved and give back in community organizations. I do one here in San Francisco focused on helping to end childhood poverty. It's also, I've gotten, like, Alteryx and some of the brands that I've worked for involved in there's usually kind of like a where, in a senior position, you're able to shepherd technology into these organizations to make the organization better.
Mhm.
I've done some of, that work too. You're just having a much bigger impact on the world and humans. But I think it comes down to perspective building.
Yeah. Perspective. That's really interesting. I think that is a big part of the answer. I mean, I look at my own personal journey specifically in the last 3 years, and I have a completely different perspective. I actually care, what happens in other countries and macroeconomics and how people are getting along and what their environments are, where they come from. I do think that there's this innate want for everybody to be better. Like at the end of the day, if you just understand most people want to be better, right? They want to improve themselves. They want to be challenged. They seek some
Most
sort
people
of
have good
purpose.
intentions.
Exactly. But ironically, since we were talking about content a little bit earlier and what I was shooting yesterday, I shot a video this morning and it was all about when you actually teach somebody something, you learn it twice. You learn it yourself the first time. So there is a bit of me that says this is also a little bit of self serving too, because when I can get on here and I can listen to what Sharon has learned, she's coaching me, but she's also relearning it herself and being like, that's a great point. Maybe this is a little different perspective, or now I understand why I did something in this way. So I think about it in that capacity too.
That's so important. Well, I have my daughter teach my husband piano and learn it better. I'm
There
not
you go.
sure yet.
I love it. That's that's so good. Well, I want to get into just as we're kind of rounding things out here. I want to get into just a couple more questions just around you and keeping yourself going. You've talked about the habitual growth app, and not that I want to plug that, but I know you've really intentionally tried to do this because you started it, you forgot about it. I know that much because you and I had talked about it, but then you took off with it, and like you said, it's really impacted your professional career. But I think your personal career, your family career, your North Stars as well. So, what do you do? Maybe whether it's in the app or not, but what do you do when nobody's watching to keep yourself going, to keep you refreshed, avoiding burnout with such a demanding job all the time?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand, like, my relationship with the HG app has changed. Like, I think it's important to view things in seasons. Like, at first, I was sort of like changing things a lot and was like, am I using this thing right? But then I found, like, that's okay because, like, I would sort of, build small habits, then become part of me, and then I'd wanna, do something else. So, I think it's important to keep your relationship with the app fluid if that works for you. So, that was something that I had to, like, realize is that my relationship with the app is fluid because I'm really kind of, like, learning and growing in different ways, or maybe from time to time, I'll kind of, like, pull back in another area for whatever reason because of a boundary that I'm setting. So my relationship with it is changing a lot over time, which I think is good. And you should constantly be evaluating what habits are making up your life because everything you do in those little moments is really kind of setting the stage for you. There's probably a couple that are in there that I've never changed. One is around getting enough sleep. And
Mm,
you gotta stay flexible. Like there's just gonna be times that, you don't, but really anchoring in on the sleep that you need and supporting rest. That's one that's lived in there. Eating well has lived in there. How you spend your first 20 minutes of your day. And even though I've changed that one over time,
mhm.
the intentionality around whatever I'm doing those first 20 minutes sets the tone for the day. And I'm still tinkering with what sets the best tone for my day with, how I spend the 20 minutes. Is it, exercise? Is it water? Is it breathing? Is it getting outside? Is it, whatever's working for me? But that's been there. Something having to do with my community has been there, like some type of community outreach, even if it's just saying hi to a fellow gardener to like keep that stream going in my life, but like something that's community oriented. Those are definitely like some of the mainstays that have been there that I think have kind of made the biggest difference.
Yeah, and they're pulling you in different ways, so it doesn't always find like I feel like people burn out when they just focus on one thing. I'm spending 90% of my time on professional career development or whatever. So just getting things done. So by doing that, I love how you phrase that. You're pulling yourself and stretching yourself in different aspects of your life that are important to you. But it all goes down to actually what you said about the four agreements, because that is a great book, very short read for everybody there. We'll link it in the show notes. But being impeccable with your word. And that's what's so cool about it. Like you said, I can work out for 5 minutes, I can work out for 60 minutes, but it's on my list. I'm going to show up. I'm going to do it in this way. And that can have different meanings for you. Just because the words are there doesn't mean like you know what you meant when you wrote it down, right? So it might be a little bit different every day, but if you gave it your best, right? If you did it with intentionality and purpose and you feel like you checked that off to conquer the day, that's amazing. So I love to hear that you're doing it in that capacity because that's absolutely the right way to be using it.
Yeah, yeah, good, good. So and actually working out is one that's always on there too. Just I've changed the language a lot around it, but I'm trying to figure out how to find, like, the right thing, and I think I found it, and it's do something physically active with your body for between 5 minutes and 60 minutes every day, and the 5 is okay and the 60 is okay. I think that's the range I'm gonna live in now, like, living in ranges is something that Greg McKeown talks about too, kind of like being okay with, like, not black or white, did I do it, did I not? But, like and it comes back to that progress versus perfection thing too, is like, this range is great, and as long as I'm operating in that range, then it's great and I'm growing because 'cause I'm in the range. I'm in the zone, you know?
I love it. All right. Well, last question for you because we like to leave people with tips, tricks, tactics, thought processes, whatever they are, that people can implement into their life now. And you are, I mean, you're an inspiration for me. You've obviously created a ton of value here for our listeners, and we've seen you move up. We know you have a big impact both in Ultrix and outside. But what are things that people can be doing now? Those that say, I want to be the next Sharon Martin. I want to work on my career, but I also want to make sure I'm well rounded and have a good family and all these wonderful things. What should people be thinking about and what can they do now?
I think there's maybe I'll give, like, 2 professional ones to start with. It's a question I get a lot. I think one thing is if you're in an individual contributor role, don't let that stop you from acting like a leader. Like, a manager's a title, but a leader's a person. So, don't be afraid to take the reins on leadership in your current role. You don't need a title to do it. Anybody can make business change or cultural change. You don't need to have a manager title to do it. I think, think like a leader in your current role and don't feel like you don't have reins to think or act like a leader. The second is, I think, people kind of like oftentimes wait for this promotion and then they get a promotion. They think they'll get a promotion and then that's when their performance level at work is going to change. Like, you should always be doing the next job without being asked to. You
Mm,
should always be operating at the next level while you're working with your manager on getting the promotion. You shouldn't be waiting for promotion to then operate at the next level. Like, you should always be operating at like that next level above you, taking on the greater responsibility without being asked, taking on greater initiatives without being asked. And I think that once you start doing that, that becomes part of a brand that you've established. You become someone that people can count on, and then opportunities start coming to you. Like, you're not forging your way for opportunities or promotion. They start coming to you because of how you're showing up, how you're delivering, impact to the business, how you're delivering cultural results. So,
mhm,
don't wait and ask. Just do the work. And what I've learned is that then the promotions, the opportunities, the projects that are really exciting to work with, like C-levels, they naturally flow to you. And then probably a personal one is, I think, for kind of like managing senior role and professional growth alongside personal growth is just if you decide to pick a partner, pick a great one and communicate really well with them would be my advice there.
I love that. And then you can have your daughter teach them piano lessons along the way.
Right.
It's fair,
And that
right?
was fine when I
She's going to learn twice as fast at it.
right, it's because I picked a great partner. He's happy to be taught piano by a 7-year-old.
That's right. Well, I love those, and I love that last line. I'm totally going to steal that, which is, managers. Being a manager is a title. Being a leader is a person, and anybody can be a leader. And it reminds me of one thing that I was reading yesterday, which is just simply, don't like you can espouse and be an identity of something. So you have to say, I am a leader and do leadership things for a while. Don't wait to get the title to then say, now I'm a leader, right? You can put your identity in the thing you are trying to be. And then you do that over time. And guess what? All of a sudden, you are a leader. You have a much bigger impact because you're already there. You've identified yourself as that person.
Yes.
So that's so good. Okay, Sharon, if people want to get a hold of you, for any reason, how can they get a hold of you?
I would say LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. LinkedIn.com/Shamarty, SHAMARTI, or you can email me directly, Sharon.Martin@Alteryx.com.
This has been so fun. We thank you for your time so much, Sharon. We audience, we hope that you love this. Sharon's an incredible person, leader, mother, community supporter, all these wonderful things. If you liked what she has shared, please put a comment below. And Sharon, you and I will chat soon because we got some pretty exciting updates coming down the pipeline for HD, which I think you'll really love as well.
Sounds amazing. Thank you, Nathan.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you later.
See ya.